RS, continuing my video series on the correspondence team match at chess.com, played between my video lessons group and the team CARPE DIEM, and this one was played on board 29. Our man is Kresho, and he's playing folderal. Again, this is on board 29. The rating advantage, we have about high 1900 versus low 1900. Let's have a look at the two games. Okay, this one, the position locks up. Well, we'll see what I mean. White's playing a variation of the Sokolsky Polish orangutan opening, and neither side is really confronting the other. They're just both developing their pieces. I often frown on these rook pawn moves, but here it's done. Let's get the arrow right. It's done to bring this bishop to e6 and not have it be bothered by a knight. It does weaken g6, but White's not really in any position to exploit that. And for the most part, except for the king's knights, both sides are developing their pieces behind their wall of pawns. So essentially there's no challenge made, no tension meaning pawn captures. It's just a matter of maneuvering here, and now tension is offered, now that development is pretty much complete on Black's part. Now, here's an interesting case. I'll often talk about getting a rook developed. If you leave your rook on the rook file and then shove your rook pawn up, it actually makes your rook develop where it's at. And that's what's going to happen. Now White has an isolated pawn. Black has a weak pawn on b7. So, there's a strategic imbalance at play here. But, again, for the most part, with both sides setting up their armies behind their pawns, not much is happening here. The game is pretty level, and here White wedges his isolated pawn down Black's throat as far as it can go, just to restrain the Black b pawn, and Black grabs the c5 square, and just a little bit of jockeying and maneuvering. Here Black is willing to open up, get rid of his weakness on b7 and open up the two queenside files, and that's going to happen here in just a moment. So often when you get a position like this, both sides have one pawn island with 6 pawns. There's no central file open, thus there's only pawns on one side of the board here. A lot of times these positions end up becoming draws simply because it's just too hard to get if you can get a pass pawn. It's hard to really gain any advantage with it, simply because the opposing king is close to it. That's one of the reasons. But the other reason, in order to get a pass pawn, you're going to have to create some kind of an imbalance or win a pawn. But there will be a coronation here eventually, as we will see, which means one side messed up. I talked about this position being locked up, and it's far from that, but it's going to happen here real soon. Okay. Here comes a chance to create some tension, but Black ignores it and pushes by. And White retreats his knight, and Black does the same, gains a tempo, attacks the rook. The rook comes to a nice square, the 7th rank, pins the knight. And now, as we see, suddenly two of the 6 files from the queen side over to the king side are locked up. How many more will get locked up? We shall see. Okay, Black breaks the pin. Now, this bishop of White's is not a very good piece. Conversely, this bishop of White's is not a very good piece. Now, neither of the bishops are really all that great in this type of position. The knights tend to rule, but right now the knights don't have good squares. What's a good square to put a knight? Well, White would like to get a knight down on b6. That'd be a good square for knight. They're colored in. F4 is a possibility for a White knight, but how does it get there? It doesn't have a clear path. It's got to get there by way of g2. Try to clear F4 colored in. Now, what good squares for Black are there? Well, F5 conversely is a good square for a knight, and b5 is a good square for a knight. Let's see if any of these happen. It won't color these in. Well, please get version 3 out, so hopefully all these bugs will be fixed. Okay. So a little more jockeying and maneuvering around. Game is still relatively even. And are we going to have more things sealed up? Yep, there it is. Another one sealed up. So we're down to all White has to do is play e3, and very likely to be a locked up draw here. But that's not going to be the case, as we will see. White does have a weakness for now, but he's covering it with pieces. It can be covered with a pawn. Now black gets his knight to b5, as I was talking about earlier. Now there's pressure on d4, but now that's sealed up. So we're down to basically the action has to happen on the A or B file, or one side has to do a pawn break in order to open up a file on the king side, and that's going to happen. There's going to be pawn break on the king side, as we will see, and black starts steering for it. He wants to get the knight to f7 to support a g5 break. And now then he probably puts the bishop where, but he has another idea for the knight. He's going to try to break g5 and get this bishop into play. Okay, so there it is on e6. Now I was talking about b6 being a good square for a knight. It's not a bad square for a bishop if you really think about it. That bishop really wasn't doing white a whole lot, although in a little bit it could be handier on the king side. We'll talk about that when we get there. But for now, it's safe to say that putting it there was probably not a bad idea. If white gets in trouble because of absence of a dark square protector on the king side, who's to say he should see that far ahead? And there's most of the congestion is over here on the queen side, but both sides have the critical squares covered, and neither side is cracking through. But now black is getting ready to transfer his queen to the king side, and here I think white commits a pretty bad mistake strategically. This knight really wasn't doing anything. It's more of a defensive anchor. It's covering a7. This is a very useful piece for white. It's his better bishop. I don't think he should have given it up. And now white suddenly, his king is kind of naked over there. And the rook can help, and it's ready to run right over, and the queen's ready to run right over. But there's going to be some problems on the diagonals because remember, white has put this bishop way over here. It's going to take a while to get it back into play, and even then we're not sure exactly what its uses are. So all of a sudden black has possibilities to open up some lines and maybe penetrate with both bishops. Let's see what happens. Okay, white wants to get rid of the rook, and that takes the black queen away from the scene on the king side. So the game is still up in the air, and we haven't seen a pawn break until there it is, and now the king is covering a light square because he didn't have a bishop to do that. But that king's getting kind of in a precarious position. This bishop's ready to come in and find a very nice square. We'll see what happens. That opens up the G file. Now, maybe white has the illusion that his king is relatively safe since there's no rooks on the board. However, there have been some new diagonals opened up. This, like I say, this is one of them, and suddenly these bishops can be putting a lot of pressure, and this queen isn't that far away from coming in and joining the mix in a lot of ways. Anyway, it's hard to believe the game will soon be over. And here, this is almost kind of puzzling. Black is playing this bishop here where it has no scope, but he's actually doing it to clear a path for the queen to get in. Okay, and he's also white puts pressure on c6. Black covers it, but he's getting ready to throw the queen into the position. White pressures c6 again, but notice how white's whole army is now over here on this side of the board chasing a pawn, and the white king is fending for himself. Strategically, black is winning now, and we'll see how he demonstrates it. Now he makes a very interesting sacrifice. If the pawn takes the knight, the bishop's coming in with check, and white is just too weak on his king is just exposed, and it's fatal. He'll lose this quickly if he takes that knight. So white regroups, grabs a piece. It was offered, but it's too late. The knight comes in here, and black is threatening a check and a checkmate. So white has to find a resource, and he figures, well, I'll pitch my knight away. But this doesn't help. And black has calculated it all out. Now there's only one move, one legal move for white. That's to come here. And another check. And look at that pawn. It's ready to promote. Black is down a piece, but these two pieces over here aren't doing a thing. And so white just grabs the pawn. Now here, black misses a forced mate. Here's what he plays. He makes a queen. There's nothing wrong with that. But watch this. Let's make it a knight. This forces mate. This is check. Now, white has two legal moves. Let's try this one. Okay. Here comes a check. Now there's one legal move, right? Check. There's one legal move. Check. There's one legal move. And checkmate. So this wasn't a hard combination to follow, a hard series to follow at all, because you just kept checking and ended up in a mate. And if white goes here, check. Now there's two moves, but this one immediately loses because this is checkmate, I do believe. And we've already seen a variation of this. Don't even need the bishop, and gets a mate. So black had a forced checkmate and didn't see it. It's always fun in correspondence chess to find these forced mates and then administer them. But anyway, he promoted to queen, which wins too. It's just not as aesthetically pleasing, but a win's a win. Now there's a fork picking up the knight. Black is queen ahead, and white's got a couple of pawns for it, but they're not doing him any good at all. And the pawn gets halted in its tracks, and it's going to be lost, so white resigned. Okay, let's reset the board and bring up the other game. What move number will it start at? It's supposed to start at move 1. We never know. Hey, it started at move 1. Okay, now our man's white, so we get a center counter or Scandinavian defense. And it's a reasonable opening for black. The knight f6 line can give white all kinds of chances to go wrong if white tries to hold on to that pawn. Here's an interesting thing about this formation. It's similar somewhat to an Alyekin's defense, the way this knight has come over here, right? In some cases, not in this case, the bishop will take the knight, undermining the defense of this pawn. But there's two reasons why black can't do this. Number one, the bishop is on this pawn on b7. Number two, this queen can check and pick up the knight. So these are things to possibly look for. Make sure that you don't walk into one of these by mistake in a few moves. Now, still can't do that combination I'm talking about. Still can't. Now he definitely can't because the pawn is covered. Okay, so neither side fell in the trap, but both being over 1900, it's doubtful they're going to. And the game's relatively even. White has a nice long diagonal for his bishop. The king is kind of naked at protectors, kind of like last game in a way, huh? But the game seems relatively even. And white does have a little lead in development, probably a little bit more boardroom. See, white's got his rooks connected and his queen out. It's not exactly sure an effective post for this queen. So he stops and guards his pawn. Maybe queen c7 might have been better. Well, then maybe knight b5. But I think white's got a little bit of an advantage here. Now there's some discovery threats. He gets the queen off the file. And, white's getting a nice development advantage now. And black decides to send some help over to the king side. And here's an interesting move. Black can't really take. Not rook takes is very potent. And bishop b4. And now kind of a surprise move. There might have been something with knight takes, king takes, and rook takes d7. But it gets complex. Here, I'll show you. Well, first off, there's nothing making black take this knight, but he could stop and take this rook. But let me show you this first. Here's the idea. you've undermined the defense of the knight, and black doesn't have time for bishop takes e1 because a queen takes f6 with mate to follow. So, but as I was saying, nothing is going to make black take this knight. He could stop and take this, but I think white can still get away with taking this. The point being, if queen takes, this queen will take. Now, if he takes here, this king is just looking awful precarious. White sacrificed a lot of material, but let's see. Queen g4, maybe. Bring the other knight up, bring this knight back. I mean, it's interesting. It's something for the players to stop and look at. I don't want to spend all day on it, but I kind of like the move he does play. It's a kind of a bolt from the blue, offering the piece, and with similar things in mind. If pawn takes, here we have rook takes again. So black tucks his king in the corner, and white still trying to undermine that king position. Black goes ahead and takes his chance, picks up the material, but white continues his attack, trying to bust open the black king. And for what it's worth, I think white's done okay here. He's given up he's won 2 minor pieces for the rook, and black can't really afford to take that bishop. He's going to run into trouble if he does. Okay, pawn takes is met by queen check. And how do you defend against this? The answer is you don't. This is fatal. So I think white's done okay here. So he swings the rook over, and white gains a tempo, attacks the rook. It goes over the corner. White picks up a pawn and blocks the check. And here I think white could probably just take this pawn and have a comfortably won position. Instead, he lets the pawn sit there and tries to win it in a few moves. But black's able to defend it and get his rook activated. But still, white is for choice here, strategically winning game with 2 minor pieces for the rook. And black is really helpless. There's just not much he can do. c5. h6, trying to get some breathing room, but it doesn't matter. And now he's piling up on e6, and now getting ready to sack on h6. It's not really a sack. Knight takes. Black can't take it because the g pawn is pinned, and if you take with the queen, you get mated. So black gives up material, but now he's down a piece and could safely resign, but he's going to try to hold out some kind of hope. White covers the back rank. Black gives his check, drives the white rook back, retreats, but white just creates air for his king, and the rook returns to the scene of the crime, and essentially black is helpless here. And white just grabs this pawn, and there's nothing black can do. White is going to liquidate on g7, liquidate all the pieces, and then this pawn will run. So white's going to win this. Anyway, well played by Kresho. Decent defense by folderal, but it just ran a little short. The critical points seemed to come right here when white got his queen developed. White just seemed to start picking up an advantage. Black just a little uncomfortable getting his pieces out. So what did black do wrong with his move choices? Was c5 the wrong move to make? Maybe black should slow play it with c6 and bring this knight into play and so forth. Kind of play it similar to a Caro-Kann type formation, and then consider maybe trying to get e5 in. Anyway, Thanks for watching. There'll be more videos, and I'll get another one made and uploaded as soon as I can. Thanks for your time.